Look at the debt levels of U.S. farmers today versus 20 or 30 years ago, it's like $535 billion of debt. We're asking them to solve for climate. We're asking them to solve for all nutrition. It is an intolerable burden, I think, we've put on farmers, and it's irresponsible and lazy for the rest of us to have done that.
Let's repurpose, let's replan, let's change, let's invest into, and our great friend Paul Hawken also demonstrates so many different ways that we can innovate. And just making a jump here, going back to following her, Mother Nature, she already demonstrates abundance in such a powerful way. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're gonna give a surf report. It's pretty flat today, and it's a good view.
Pretty good place to be.
Thank you for flying in. I know you got other stuff always going on. We were just reflecting. We met a year ago at
so crazy
Spain at the, what was it called? The South Summit, which was a cool event. Did you do it again? Or
No.
is it? No. Which was an interesting, I don't know what comes of those things. Like you do those things and it's kind of like,
I appreciate they had a lot of young people there. And then meeting you, hands down, was like the best part of that trip.
100%. Yeah. The talk was like, talks are like, but then it's like, oh, we had our own little pod of just deep dive.
Totally.
Running around trying to find the vegan places in Spain. Well, I think that it warrants unpacking a bit your first part of the journey, not the first, but the first public pummeling.
Yeah.
And the first kind of juggernaut that I think things are starting to come out more and more, I hope, right? But the unhealthy truth, right? And then your TED Talk and your kind of that first person.
Yep.
Going after the food and the ag and the chemical, going, what the hell's going on? So why don't you just unpack that a little bit? We'll spend a little bit, because I want people, because I know and with Seeding Innovation, it's about leadership, it's about business practices, and I think there's a great jump for people about life. Yeah. Anything that they're doing in life, these principles will apply. But and you and I met kind of on some of these levels. I had finished Fatal Conveniences, and we're staring at these elephants in our room of the society, and you took that on kind of solo.
I was early.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was early.
So talk to us about that unhealthy.
So I grew up in a conservative Texas family. And so, I'm an unlikely person to even be speaking to this. I still find it odd when I have to tell the story. I grew up in a conservative family in Texas and went to private schools. I mean, nowhere in my upbringing was there anything around advocacy. But I have 4 children, and when my youngest had a life-threatening allergic reaction, I was just really trying to figure out ways to protect her. And what I was able to do was leverage this background that I had up until that point, which is sort of the first quarter of my life.
Yeah.
And I'd gone to business school on a full scholarship. I had graduated as a top woman in my class. I'd done a Fulbright in Paris. I was really academic. And when I was applying for jobs out of grad school, Enron was recruiting about a third of my class. And I just knew culturally that was not going to be a good fit. And it was weird because, even then, we used to joke like no means no, and Enron could not accept that I really did not want to work there. Like those guys just wouldn't stop. But I really knew I didn't want to work there. I knew it was a bad fit. And so when that story began to unravel, it didn't surprise me. And I had chosen to go and work on an investment team that managed $20 billion in assets. We launched the company's first hedge fund. It was so much fun. I mean, being inside of a huge company like that, launching a hedge fund, having those meetings, it was so entrepreneurial inside of a really big institution. And then I was the only woman on the team, so the guys were like, you're going to cover the food industry. And I mean, this is where our paths are so different, because I was not a food person at all. Diet Cokes probably 6 times a day, like I didn't think about it.
Right.
I grew up exercising all the time, but like the food piece just really hadn't paid attention to. And so when I was learning it on the investment desk, it was really mechanical and really financial. And then fast forward a couple years and started my family, very type A. And so, as everything I had done up until that point, just kind of wanted to power through that. And so we had 4 kids really quickly. And it was when my 4th child had this life-threatening allergic reaction that all of a sudden I was sort of able to take all of that and look at the food industry and ask questions about what's happening, because the data around children with food allergies, children with autism, children with asthma, ADHD, all of these conditions that are now being called the 4As because they impact 1 in 3 kids in the US, the numbers were just jaw-dropping. And as a numbers person, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Our genetics don't change this quickly. So what in the world in the environment could have triggered something like this? And there are a lot of theories out there. My expertise has always been food. That's always been the place that I've stayed, because that's the background that I have. There are plenty of people that come at it from other sides. But as I really started to sort of narrow in on that, I went back into the industry that I had covered. I went back to the analysts that I had worked with. And then I also started to reach out to scientists. And in the 1990s, there was just this huge change in the way that we produced food in this country. And we started genetically engineering stuff so that it could withstand higher doses of weed killers and pesticides and all these things. And I just remember sitting there as a young mother and thinking, oh my God, what have we done? And to learn that other countries either had not allowed this process or had labeled it. I mean, you can feel it. It's like the grief that was in me as a mother, realizing that we had introduced this completely new operating system into the U.S. food supply without informing consumers, felt so like the justice of that felt so wrong, and the sort of fundamental belief I had in who we are as Americans and our right to choose felt so violated. And I thought, how do I tell this story? And so I began, with simply a super simple website, Allergy Kids Foundation. I mean, I really was not looking just to poke the beast. And I had this ability to articulate it, I think, because I had this incredible education, this background in finance, and people grabbed it. And especially if you look at the media, it's very much governed by a lot of men in these leadership positions, and they grabbed it. They said, you can speak to this. And so I found myself on CNN and the Today Show and all these things, like out of the gate, no experience, just straight into these rooms, doing these big shows. And it caught the attention of a lot of people. That then resulted in a book deal coming together really quickly in Valentine's Day of 2008. And that was The Unhealthy Truth. And so we published it on Mother's Day of 2009. And I naively thought, oh, I've written it all. Like, all the research is there. I've done the work for everybody. Here's the book. I'm going to go back to what I had planned for my life, which is pretty funny now. And, I can see really clearly how really at that point, I really do look at Mother's Day of 2009 as the inflection point. And a lot of people will say, well, you had done all of the work, and they sort of felt like the story was up until that point. It is now really clear to me that was sort of the build. Once you go public with something like this, and you have to defend yourself against multinational corporations that really don't want you talking and are doing everything they can to bully and intimidate you, that's actually when your journey starts. Because it would have been really easy to have just abandoned it, but I couldn't. And I also had this incredible group of researchers and scientists and people around the world. I'm a dual citizen. My mother's from New Zealand, so I understood that other countries were really analyzing and looking at this in a very different way than we do in the U.S. So really in 2009, when I had to go public with the book and then was asked to give a TEDx talk in Austin in 2011, those were just catalytic years. I don't even know how to describe what happened after that.
Right. I'm curious, because it's easy to see, for those of us that look a little bit, that the Industrial Revolution started increasing the ultra-processed world, the ultra-processed food. What was it in the 90s? What was the shift of that policy, of the lobbying, of the chemical ultra ag, what was that like?
I've talked to people that worked at Monsanto during that time, and I've been invited to debate them and different things along through the years. And I think they truly, truly believed that if they could scale agriculture in this operating system, they were going to feed the world. And I think the people that early on were ascribing to that inside of these multinationals in the 1990s, I do believe that was the intent. When you speak to people inside of those companies, they say then all of a sudden they realized what was happening, and that's when the split happened. So I don't think at the outset it was anything but we're just trying to scale agriculture to feed the world.
And this is where, with polarization, these nuances aren't discussed much, right? And the more I've leaned into and gotten to meet people inside companies and things like that, I find there's these gray areas too, and there's always good people like that.
Always.
And it's almost flippantly naive. You start something and you're like, hey, we want to feed people, and then all of a sudden you've created a monster, right?
Well, let's talk about the monster, because I think that's important. So when you think about an operating system, the one that we're all familiar with is like Microsoft Office. And you sort of license the use of that thing. You pay to participate and license the use. And that is basically what was introduced in farming in the 1990s, is that they introduced this operating system called genetically engineered crops. And up until that point, farmers have been able to save seeds season after season after season. So that was financially viable for a farmer because they could save seeds. Right. You flip that on its head, and all of a sudden in this operating system, just like we have to license the use of certain things, farmers had to license the use of these seeds. And so it completely changed the financial model of farming, and that gets lost in the nuances too. And that is something that is irrefutable, because when you look at the debt levels of U.S. farmers today versus 20 or 30 years ago, it's like $535 billion of debt they carry. And we're asking them to solve for climate. We're asking them to solve for all nutrition. We're asking them to solve. It is an intolerable burden, I think, we put on farmers. And it's irresponsible and lazy for the rest of us to have done that. But that genetically engineered operating system fundamentally changed the financials on the farm, because the farmer suddenly had to take out a loan to buy a seed year after year after year. He wasn't allowed to save the seeds because they were patented by these corporations. And then on top of that, it increased the pesticide use. And I think that's when things started to tip. When all of a sudden the promise was, hey, we'll genetically engineer these seeds and they're going to be Roundup ready and able to tolerate the weed killer. And then all of a sudden the Mother Nature, kind of whips around and figures she's smarter. She's smarter than us. And so she outsmarted that operating system, and things like super weeds were created. So then it resulted in increased use of these weed killers. And suddenly the problem started to spin in an unintended direction. And I think that was really when a corporation has a decision to make. Do they either move forward in an attempt to actually correct for something, or do they move forward in an attempt to cover it? Yeah,
so they cover it and then they double down. And they keep doubling down. And then they keep going and going and going. And that's where which kind of leads us into the second book, but we'll get there. Just like the new operating system, like how we integrate into that. But, so not only did society get a curveball, you got a curveball, right? And what's that quote? You had somewhere, your happiness in life is determined on how you handle the curveballs, which is a perfect quote.
I mean, she was an amazing mentor, that woman. I probably say that once a week.
Right. And who was she again?
Her name was Lou Ann Katz, and she was my internship out of grad school, the summer in between my first and second year of business school. And then therein lies resiliency. Therein lies a muscle that you didn't even know you needed to work on. And therein lies, what are you going to do about it? Therein lies the character of you. Therein lies the transmutation of that. And so you are personally being faced with this. You hit the beast. You rattled the cage. You hit the bee's hive. And once the bees are out, they're out. So then all of that happens,
and but at the same time, you co-founded Replant. So you took your abilities, and you're like, well, let's repurpose, let's replant, let's change, let's invest into. And our great friend Paul Hawken also demonstrates so many different ways that we can innovate.
Yep.
And just making a jump here, going back to following her, Mother Nature, she already demonstrates abundance in such a powerful way. And the implosion that absolutely has to happen if you go against her. Like, that's the...
Yeah, I mean, I think there were really, really dark nights in the early years. My kids speak to it now, you know, of the fear they had when I would travel, the bullying and the intimidation that we saw. It was early. It was 2009, 2010, 2011. The online bullying was early.
And the bullying...
really aggressive. I mean, there were a lot of intimidation tactics. And, you know, I have and always have had a very, very deep faith. And that was a compass in those early years. I leaned into that faith in a really profound way. And I can remember sitting, you know, at the pickup at the elementary school, looking at the children and knowing the data and sort of overlaying it on a group of kids at a playground and just thinking, who will speak up for this? And knowing that other countries around the world had moved in a much more preventative, precautionary way. We had just blindly introduced this stuff without labels. Other countries were either labeling it or they weren't allowing it. In France and New Zealand, for example, they don't even allow genetically engineered crops planted in the soil because of the concern around soil health. And yet here we were, like, feeding it to every animal we eat and feeding it to every person that ate. And, you know, I remember sitting with that darkness, and I think it's something that we try not to do. We try to sort of like go around it or somehow numb it or not want to go through it. And probably one of the greatest lessons of the last 15 years, whenever there is darkness, the smartest thing you can do is just be in it and sit with it until you understand the lesson that you're supposed to learn. And for me, in those early years, it was one of courage. And it's not lost on me that the word courage is derived from the Latin word for heart. And the thing I knew was that, to me, this work has always been a love thing. There was no way I could use fear to try to motivate people. That's not how I operate. It shuts me down. So I thought, like any mother, like if you come at her with all this horrible information about this stuff, she's going to shut down. And women in our generation are so beautifully educated and so intelligent and so passionate about some of these issues that if you really respect that and you educate them from that place and you give them this inspiration from this place of love, that is so catalyzing, you know? So that's always been the way that I chose to move through. And I studied different leadership styles and really chose that. I mean, I looked at Martin Luther King and how he had led the civil rights movement, and so much of his work was done from this space of love and not anger and fear. And I thought, like, that's where power comes from, is love. And then I looked at like a Harvey Milk and the way he had led the gay rights movement, and I thought, you know, he led with gratitude. So I took those two things and I thought love and gratitude are really the way to lead. I looked at people like Al Gore and, you know, the way he had sort of offered this incredible problem, but then had really dropped and there just weren't solutions that were viable, and how that just left people feeling like they should jump off a cliff. And I thought, like, I can't do that, you know? And I knew pretty early on that this was going to be this is my life's work. And I think for most of us, you know, there is a point in our lives where you will have an opportunity to do something. And in this case, it was really clear it was a calling. And you either have the choice to accept that calling and pick up the phone, or you're going to put it down. And I think for most of us, we can look back on our lives at these different intersections and know when we decided we were going to level up, or if we were going to play it safe and stay down. And I think that playing safe, that conditioning is so strong in society, that sameness, that conformity, the belonging in that safeness, that it keeps people held in that safeness, but it is suffocating. Yeah. And so, for me, a lot of the work that I personally had to do was, how am I going to move to that place of courage and operate from this place of love in a way that I can do this work? Because the information to me, as I held it, I thought, if I hold this inside and don't do something with it, I won't make it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that it just felt so personal, and I felt such a responsibility to try to give the talent and the skill sets that I had to this work, because I see it as this incredible collective. I mean, we need the scientists, we need all of these amazing different people and voices. And I knew I occupied this, really specific piece.
If you distill down what your main driver outcome would like to be in your lifetime, what do you think it would be?
I think that we all have this ability to make a difference. And I think, in my second book, I talk about not enoughness syndrome, is that we really think that we're not enough. And imposter syndrome. I mean, I don't want to name names, but the number of CEOs that have come to me with imposter syndrome. When the first book came out, there was a lot that tried to sort of silence me and get it quiet. And I was given the opportunity to give that TEDx talk out of Austin, and that was the game changer, not the first book. I mean, really, that was the game changer. My mistake was that I forgot to cite the first book, which has 60 pages of endnotes and just copious amounts of science in it. But when I gave that talk and it went online in February of 2011, we started to watch it just tick up, and the way the views started to tick up. And, the woman who had curated it, we were just like, holy shit, what's happening? And I thought, what happens now? It was pretty scary. And one of the first CEOs that I heard from was a CEO inside of Nestle, and he was a dad of 3, and he said, you can say things I can't say, I need you to come in here. And so a lot of the work from that point on was really helping people remember that they matter and that they can really make a difference. But I think we've all, somewhere along the way, if it was in your upbringing, in your childhood, if it was a boss, if it was, something terrible that has happened to us, we tend to let go of that rope and think that we can't make a difference and we don't matter. And I think if there is one message that is so incredibly important, it is that you are here right now at this time, and you matter. Yeah. And so it's figuring out, what are the things that you love, what are the things that you're passionate about, and then leveraging that with what you're good at, and that's your sweet spot. And you're not supposed to look or feel like anybody else. Yeah,
because I think whether you're a CEO at Nestle or someone in your community that has a spark of an idea of a food cooperative, and you're just afraid to do it, like, why do you think, like, I think I've tried to start to realize that I can feel that energy pop up, like doing a TV show, trying to do another one, and like, who am I? Like, it's not strong because I don't know if I beat it down or I just, the power of hooking on to the reason is stronger than my imposter side of it. So I think it's a muscle that's been building, so it's less of a hindrance for me,
right?
But still can be there,
right?
And I think anyone, anywhere in their life, can it's a litany of excuses between. And I think the seduction, like you were saying before, the seduction of safety, or I am just who I am. I got too many things to do. I couldn't possibly do that. Why would it be me? I'm seeing something. I think the thing is, like, similar to you, but you did something about it. You saw something in your own family, in your own children, and then you just kept pulling the string. And then all of a sudden this beautiful badass is on television everywhere. And to your point, you were like, how am I here?
Right.
Right? Like,
I still have those moments. And I think about, it was Jim Bell at the Today Show. I write it in Seeding Innovation. I would send these emails out to journalists editors, magazines, TV shows. I mean, I didn't have a PR team. I didn't have any PR background. I would just send these emails out full of the data around what was happening to children's health. And it was Jim Bell at the Today Show. He's executive director at the time. And he replied. And I just remember thinking, like, what the hell? Like, how did this guy reply? And so when the first book came out, he was the one that got me on the Today Show. And I do think authenticity is rare. I think that's part of the formula here. We think we need to be like someone else, and that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I am a weird combination of all of these things, and it just is, it's made me who I am. And I think the older I've gotten, the more I've just settled into that. And when you really do sort of completely relax into that authenticity, that is such a powerful place to operate from. And I think it gives other people permission to do the same, because it's exhausting trying to fit into what we think other people's expectations of us should be. And I think generationally, there's just so much change happening right now. I look to my parents, and see the conditioning that was there, that was well-intended to try to protect somebody. I mean, they were from the South, and they had this absolutely just strong-headed daughter, that was coming up. And to them, that, was probably something that may not have served me well. And so I understand how that was coming from a place of love. And now I turn to my 4 children, and it's just like they have no tolerance for anybody that isn't part of the solution, and that courage is just required out of that younger generation. So,
I there is a power in authenticity. And I think it's something that it's easily brushed off for people, right? To the point where that CEO is acting as if they need to, or the CEO of the household, the mom, like, it's so easy to, I don't know if you find this, but it's sometimes if we haven't cultivated that or said yes to it, it's a light touch of a voice, and it's easily brushed off because, hey, well, my friends would think I'm weird, or whatever it is.
Yep.
So how do you think the cultivation of authenticity can be kind of exercised better?
So there are 2 things that I really have landed on over the years. And I think about the last 15 years, writing that first book wasn't the journey. A lot of people thought that was a journey, but it's like the journey has been from that first book until now. And, I think we're afraid to start small. We see, especially with social media, we see these grand successes, and you're like, oh God, I've got to do it that way or not at all. That will not get you out of the gate. Right. And so, don't be afraid to start small. The first talk I gave, 6 people came. I invited the kid's pediatrician. I invited this friend that was a nutritionist. Those 2 ended up getting married, which I still firmly believe was sort of like a blessing on the whole thing. But there were 6 people there.
Right.
And then last week I spoke at the World Bank. And so if I had not done that first event with 6 people, I would never have gotten to that stage at the World Bank. And I think just don't be afraid to start small. That's one of the things. And then I think, there are 2 pieces that I talk about in seeding innovation that I think are really important. And when I was working with these CEOs of these multinational companies and really trying to help them get into the right headspace, they knew as dads, it's mostly men, they knew as dads what they wanted to do. They felt as CEOs that there were things they couldn't do. So I was like, well, so then how do we bridge that? And the term that I use in the book is called scaffolding, because anything that is constructed, any building, any beautiful piece of art, usually has scaffolding that goes around it as it's constructed into this amazing, beautiful thing. And I don't think we're any different as people and as leaders and in this becoming the best version of ourselves. But for some reason, we've been taught to think that we have to do it all by ourselves, and that when you put that scaffolding around someone, the likelihood of success is so much higher, just the way, you're supporting any infrastructure, anything that's being built. And as I looked at that in my own life, I mean, there are people that were part of that scaffolding. There is someone in Boulder who I would not have made it had he not been there. There are people that are just part of that scaffolding. And then I think the part that can be hard is if there's someone in that inner container that shouldn't be there, that is actually weak and sort of rotting, where you need to move that person out of the way so that you've got a really resilient, strong scaffolding. And that is something I've had to do too. And so, when you really think about that scaffolding, who are those people that absolutely have your best interest at heart, that absolutely have your back? Because I think the greatest way that you can show you love someone is to have their back. I mean, that just like, that's how you show you love someone.
Right.
So that scaffolding that you choose to put around you is really important, and it's going to actually determine the likelihood of success. And then the other thing I talk about, because this was something that I was really aware of, is that voice in our heads, you know, and that, oh, this is going to look stupid, or what are people going to say? Or,
Right.
you know, what is your dad going to say? What's your spouse going to say? You know, what's your boss going to say? And that voice can be really, really mean. And I had a really mean one in my head. And so as I was writing Seeding Innovation, I thought, like, what the hell? Like, what is up with this voice? And I was talking to the different CEOs, and they were talking about imposter syndrome. And so I was like, I would talk about it. I'm like, I have this voice in my head. And people are like, oh, yeah, same. So I created something called the STOP protocol. And it's to literally stop that negativity and that naysayer in your head. Because I think it is one of the most destructive voices that is probably going to do more to sort of just absolutely torpedo a dream than anything. And so the S stands for suspend the voice, because you got to like actually suspend it and create a little space, and then feel like, is it male? Is it female? Is it a parent? Is it your mom? Is it your dad? Whose voice is it? It's usually not yours.
Right.
And then the T is tone police it, because I promise you, there is no way you would ever be as mean to me as you are to yourself in your head. Like, you would never allow those thoughts out of your mouth to anyone else in your life. Like, we can be so mean to ourselves. So that's T, tone police it. O is offer an alternative. So can you actually very intentionally create a voice in your head? And then P is practice it. And it probably took me about a year to completely rewire that voice in my head. And it got to where it's like every time that mean voice would come, I would literally stop it and replace the narrative with a kinder voice. And I'm telling you, like at 53, I'm like, how did I live all of these years without having my own back in my head? Like, that is it is an amazing shift to really replace that criticism and realize that voice was never yours. It didn't belong to you. It maybe was well-intended from a generation prior, but it does not serve us for where we are right now, because where we are right now, I think, requires optimism, and it requires love. I mean, it requires all of those really positive attributes, you know, to stay in it like you and I do, you know, for the duration.
I mean, what you said is there's so many different aspects that are so powerful with that. It's almost like you have to work to create the space to then get some separation between it, and then kind of gestalt it. Like, where the hell is that from? Where is it coming from? And realizing that it was never yours anyway.
Never your voice.
But you've just adopted it. You've just gotten used to it, and then it's like your wiring is it's like
your nervous system.
Yeah. So you're recreating the nervous system's reaction. It's like that whole abuse syndrome, right?
Totally.
You just like, but I love him, and then he hits me. Like, you know,
you're doing that to yourself when you're mean to yourself in your head. Yeah.
Right.
I know. I mean, some of these different leaders that I've worked with, I'm like, hear my voice. Because it's like, I will talk, I'm like, you know, hear my voice. When that voice comes at you and it's being cruel and mean, like, hear my voice. You know?
Yeah. And that's a practice.
It is totally a practice.
Because it's mostly been with you probably for most of your life.
But I think, you know, like, I mean, I thankfully have two parents that exercised every day. Right. So the four of us grew up just exercising every day. We did that as like brushing our teeth. Like, it's just what we grew up doing. And that's practice, you know, that I cannot imagine not having that be part of my life. And so then there are other things that I've sort of layered in as I've gotten older that I've realized, you know, I could do this in a very physical sense, but there's a lot of sort of inside work that merits that same discipline and that same practice. And this is definitely one of those things. I mean, I've really, the executives that I've worked with, when somebody asked, like, how long did it took a year to completely rewire that voice. And it was just game changing. Right.
The thing that's kind of pops in my head is the obvious, like, that's being a leader of yourself first, right? And then it's like, which you talk about in many different ways, that instead of force, it comes from that power and that invitation and that vulnerability and that love and that gratitude, but clear, right? And that's is there demonstrations or what are the demonstrations of good leadership that you're seeing in the world? Do you have any examples of that?
I think there are a lot in the youth movement, you know. I mean, I think the way you guys did the Down to Earth show was exactly right. The joy and the love, you know, I think that we're craving that as much as authenticity. We're craving joy, and we're craving love, and we're craving belonging, you know, and the energy of that show was exactly that. It just felt like somebody had their arm around your shoulder and, you know, walked you into the forest or the ocean or wherever you guys were to teach. And I think it's that kind of belonging that's so important. But yeah, I really think the younger generation, they're just leading with such purpose and authenticity, and it's, you know, it's for survival for them.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, at the same time they're battling record numbers of anxiety and depression and suicide rates and substance abuse and all of these things. And, you know, again, when you really look at all of that at its core, it's really, you know, it's that darkness, it's that pain. And that point can either open you or it can absolutely, you know, take you under.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's also, you know, I'm curious with you as well. It's like when you face kind of all of those things head on, and you're kind of in your own. And I had this with Fatal Conveniences too. It's like you're by yourself, and you're reading, and you're consuming, and you're staring at it, you're writing, and you're like, I'm like, just what the like, you know a little bit.
Yeah.
I knew a little bit when I say that, because once you really dive into something, it's unbelievable. And so, and kind of going back to like down to earth thing too, it's like, because I can flip to the other side and get intense, because I can definitely go, I've got off some interviews and stuff going, oh, that was way too much, right?
Yeah.
That was just bang, 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 bang. And I know I left them paralyzed.
Yep.
Like I failed, right? And it's easy to kind of get into that trap myself. Whereas I think I've told you the tension that was on Down to Earth in a good way, like having a counterweight to where I know I can go, of going like a respected colleague who doesn't come from my place, was weirdly not planned, but perfect.
Oh, it was perfect.
Right?
Because even before I knew you, I remember watching that with the kids and just thinking like, your balance to Zach was absolutely perfect. And that was way before I met you.
Right.
And I think the responsibility we feel when we learn these things to then deliver it as much as possible. I see that all the time. I'm contacted by people all the time who are preparing to give their first talk, or they're getting ready to present, you know, something before legislation. They're like, Robyn, how do I do this and not overwhelm? And I always say, like, what is the one takeaway that you want people to leave with? One thing. Because we all know 29 things, you know, that we want to teach. And it's like, what's the one thing? And for me, it's always, you know, really that you have the ability to make a difference. Pick the thing that you care the most about, and you have the ability to make a difference. Because what we're all waking up to is that we've inherited these systems that, yeah, maybe they really were well intended, and they have a lot of externalized costs that are, you know, falling onto the planet, onto the climate, onto the health of our families. And that is just brutal to wake up to that. And then you're dealing with this weird family tension of older generations that didn't mean to cause all this problem, you know, but they were part of the systems that now we're realizing, you know, have sort of leaked all over everything.
It's a good term.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think for me, honestly, finding people like you, friendships and
it's everything.
And it's because it's, and the Chris Pattons and the Troy Swopes, who's developing alternatives for PFAS with algae, and you know, it's. I'm grateful to have these types of conversations every week, like, but we all can't have that, and it's. I think that's absolute medicine for me,
Same.
in the sense that, if there's, I always say you got to face it to change it. You gotta, there's a certain point, like I can't bury my head in the sand, right? And at the same time, I get really excited, like just talking to you right now, I get butterflies because there is movement. There is people breaking free. Like we had a group visiting us from the UK, and Chris, I'll show you offline the hydrogen on fire, and like I'm going to show you that stuff. And there's a UK group that has a blank check, right? And they're ready, right? So stuff's happening, man.
Well, I think, as Americans, we tend to think that we lead the world in all of these different ways, but on the environmental piece, we are lagging. And there's so much that we can learn from other countries and best practices that are happening around the world. Totally. And if you can come with the mindset of a student, which is how I've always lived my life, I love to learn. And if you can really have an open mindset like that, it's wide open to participate in the change. And I agree completely that having that support, that scaffolding, having those friendships to lean into, people when you're having a day where it's just like you're in the rabbit hole and it feels really big, that somebody understands exactly what that feels like and knows how to help bounce you back out of it is also really important. Because I do think for most of us that are in this work, the responsibility can feel really huge, and it's why I maintain this completely. Part of your job is taking care of yourself. Like that is actually part of your job, because you will not be operating from a clear head or a clear heart if you don't. Because if you grind and grind and grind, it takes your energy down, and you've got to stay in that place of clarity and balance.
Well, you're such a great example of that, because you come from this high achieving, academic, data driven, but then you popped yourself into a need as a parent, and then threw yourself in the middle of something that you didn't even realize was just a monster. And now with your second book, that seeding innovation, and it's such a perfect kind of combination of words, because it's coming from you as well, how to reinvent how we go into, of course, the workplace, and how as businesses, and I think it's happening, man. I mean, you're dealing with the World Bank, and there's, you're seeing the implosions, so you're also seeing the other doors that you didn't think were going to be open are starting to open. What are you super hopeful about right now?
Yeah, I mean, it really has been interesting, and I can see really clearly how the first book, which was so hard for me to advocate on, because it just went against I am an optimist,
Right.
And here I was having to tell the story of this just horrible information that had happened in the U.S. food system, that no other country had really gone at it the way we had. It really, that was a hard story for me to have to tell. And I naively kept wanting to hand it over to somebody else. And the perfect example was when I emailed Erin Brockovich, and I was like, here, here's all this stuff. You're so good at this. And she wrote right back, and she said, I'm so glad somebody's finally taken this on. And she had lost her brother to an allergic reaction. And I just remember thinking, it just gave me the chills, because I thought that we all play a role. What she was basically saying was, this is your role to play.
Right.
Thank you for stepping up and doing it, And now with Seeding Innovation, it's such a joy, because this is how we can all participate and be part of the solutions. And I do think so much of that has to do with mindset and resiliency and learning how to unshackle ourselves from the conditioning we've been raised in. And I think for so many of us, it's sort of good girl, good boy, what were you taught to do by your parents? And again, that was so well intended, but a lot of that conditioning isn't actually going to serve as we move forward. And that's where I think as a generation to generationally find your cohort, find your soul family, that's such an important part of this work.
Yeah, and I think it's the stark realization sometimes that you don't have some of the people that are around you may not be.
That's the piece of the scaffolding. You have to, that's hard.
That's hard to defriend people in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, we do it easily on social media, but it's really important in life too. And I tell my kids that. I'm like, we don't hesitate to like unfollow or defriend somebody on social media. And that same skill is really important in life, and it's okay. It just means, you know, that as you grow and you continue to move forward, you want to make sure that you have just a very, very sincere and robust support system around you.
Yeah, and I think the more clear you get, the more, you know, I think the helpful side of that is the more clear you are, the more committed you are. It creates a magnetic,
Totally.
I mean, not to be woo-woo, because it's a absolute not, it's a very clear field.
Totally. Well, I think, you know, it's like you really want people, you know, there's sort of that thing where it's like you can either have people around you that are fountains that are really sort of lifting you up, or you have people around you that are drains.
Right.
And you just know when you're around a drain.
Yeah.
I mean, like a drain, it just literally
like,
takes
oh
you
my
down,
God.
you know? So it's like, clear the drains.
I must leave this situation. Yeah, it's and I think so. Everyone listening, that's in all areas.
Totally.
Like that's.
We all know it, and I think that's why in seeding innovation, there's so much. I realized in working with so many of these corporations over the years, I was like, wow, there's just some fundamental stuff, human stuff, you know, that we all share here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, that the walls that you break down and kind of make it so human. It's not just like this powerful CEO needs to be like no, man, your authenticity leads into your powerful leadership, not out of force, but out of like, it's and that's the impact. And then why are you here? What's your purpose? What can you like? I love how you've kind of put that all together, because it's been missing for so long.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, it's a business leadership book. I think there's a lot of sort of personal discovery stuff in there too. And, you know, as a woman who has been navigating this in the business world my entire career, and it is a man's world, you know, and I would say in the early part of my career, I tried to sort of fit that mold. I mean, even think about the way we dressed, you know, when I was in the investment world. I mean, we dressed like a woman's suit was just a female version of the man's suit. Like that was it, you know?
Right.
And I've realized, and I think maybe part of this is the grace and the grit that is motherhood, is that all the things that made me who I am, this feminine side, is really an important piece. And the nurturing and the nourishing that we do as mothers, like that piece is so important. It has been undervalued in business, and I think it is critical, because I think we've got a lot of leaders who are really at break point too. And I think you see those parallels where it's like, if somebody gets to a place of despondency or despair, they're not effective. And then I also, I'm not going to name names, but there are definitely business leaders who are just toxic, you know, and they just leak all over every social media platform, all over their teams, and that's not effective either. And if you look at money and capital and investments as a resource, we can't afford to be wasting those resources. And it's like, I think people kind of have this weird relationship with money, and it's like, it's energy. Again, it's like, it's somebody's time, effort, and love. You know, if you're trading your time for that capital, how you actually are going to choose to invest that capital should really be an extension of you. It should reflect all of your hard work and values. And I don't think enough people have sort of made that connection yet, which is coming next. And so it's like, just as we sort of 15 years ago, we're really transitioning the food system, and people started to wake up and say, hey, I want better for you options. And the same's going to happen in finance, where it's like, we're starting to realize like how I'm investing is actually destroying the planet, you know? And you think about the assets that you hold, or the funds that you hold, or they in Exxon and Syngenta and Bayer. I mean, like, do you even know if these are your values? And so the better for you opportunities that are beginning to emerge in finance, and women are going to play an incredible role in that.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, you could have easily gotten pissed, stayed pissed, gotten hard, shut down, become quote unquote a man, because of the early forms of absolute brutal cancel culture. Right?
Yep.
Like, and here you are, a shining example of like, no, you've done a lot of work, and you're like actually implementing the very opposite. And it's such a breath of fresh air because, like, unbeknownst to me consciously, I'm surrounded by incredibly great women that are running my business and, like, because it's a better balance, you know, and I would urge people to see that more and more. So, like,
so that's a question I get a lot because, you know, people are like, where's the anger? You know, for how I was treated, for what's been done. Like, there are plenty of reasons to be angry. And, you know, I think when I was younger, I just saw anger as an ineffective emotion. And I still do. I think it's ineffective. I think it can only accomplish so much. And in the darkness of the early years of this work, the way it felt was as if I had fallen down a well. And, you know, as I was learning sort of how contaminated the food system was, how completely different it was to other countries, how there was a double standard with American food companies literally producing better products for other countries. So it's like we weren't even asking them to reinvent the wheel. Like, they were already doing it. They were just selling us the crappier stuff.
Right.
And the offense of that and the injury of that to so many families sort of took me what felt like a well. And I realized, you know, I went through all of these different levels of emotion. I went through anger, I went through sadness, I went through grief, I went through despair, and I realized that as I fell down through all those levels, the reason that I felt grief and sadness and despair and anger and all these things was because I loved. And I realized what I had to do was somehow alchemize those feelings until I got to love. And that takes some time, and that's sort of the sitting in it. You know, you kind of got to sit in it. And most people want to react, and they just want to get straight to action. And when you're doing that without sort of actually rooting down, you're not going to be as effective. And I don't know where I learned that, but somewhere early on, I knew I had to sit in it. And anytime I have confronted a big life change or something that has just been wildly uncomfortable, I know that I absolutely have to sit in it until I've alchemized it, until I've alchemized that emotion back to love. And that sounds really woo-woo too, but it's like, otherwise you're coming from a more reactive place instead of a really centered and grounded place.
Well, it's actually the most non-woo-woo thing because we divorce our bodies, we divorce our feelings. We divorce those, like, for whatever reason, as a kid, I had this monk sitting in a swamp. I always had, so I don't know where that came from either. Like, when I'm going through shit, I just visualize that monk sitting right in the swamp.
Totally what it is.
Right?
Yeah.
Just sit there. It smells, it's gross. It's like, just be, and allow yourself to go through it, because on the other side, we're so addicted to reacting and the algorithms and the social and, like, I mean, I find it, sometimes I put out the most non-reactive, beautiful, like, quote, and for sure there's someone that's going to find something just stupid to comment. And I'm like going, wow, that's like effort to find something. So it's like it's a weird end. At the same time, we want to avoid all pain, right? So any sort of pain, we don't want to sit in the swamp. But that's the thing. It's here. Like, and we divorce it, and there's somatic experiences that is in your body. I talked to many healers over the freaking decades, shamans, healers. Every time I ask them similar question, how much of this scenario of their pain, of their disease, whatever, is emotional? They say, there's 100% always an emotional component to every disease, to every situation.
Well, I mean, I think, and I talk about this in the book too, if you break down the word disease into dis-ease, like, we're not at ease. You know, we're holding something that's uncomfortable, that's not at ease. And, you know, I think pain is probably one of the most beautiful teachers. I mean, it's a beautiful teacher. And we don't get through this life without pain. You know, I think maybe that was something that should have been taught a lot more clearly, you know, that like it's part of the journey and it's one of the best teachers you're going to have.
Totally.
And that when you hit those pockets of pain, to just ask yourself what you're supposed to be learning in that moment.
Right.
And I talk about this in the book because I had these, you know, clearly, I mean, you don't take on corporations like I did 15 years ago before anybody was talking about this without there being real pain. And I can remember laying in bed at night and literally visualizing, like, if my heart had shutters on it, like, and just opening it to the sky and just thinking, help me learn the lesson I'm supposed to be learning right here. What is the lesson I'm supposed to learn so that I can move through this as quickly as possible? And that's still like and I know now, you know, when I've hit something that it is, that I am sort of in pain on, I really have learned just to sit until I figure out the lesson.
Well, and that's a superpower, right? For all of us. And I think, you know, if we realize that pain is a propeller for possibilities, purpose, it's just disguised.
Yeah.
And I think going back to the sitting through it, like, and then I go to this philosophical understanding, and also knowing, like, there's nothing wrong in the universe ever. There's nothing ever wrong. It's just us understanding the message. And like that, the beautiful thing of your journey is that you're here now innovating and creating and aligning. And like, this earth was being hurt by us before we were here.
Yeah.
Right? We are polluting. We're doing all kinds of crazy shit. The climate is being affected. We're being affected. The bees are being affected. The soil's being... So now you're here with a smile on your face, kicking ass, right? That's a transmutation. Or you could be bitter, angry, pissed off, and doing none of what you're doing. So if anyone should be that way, you should be that way.
Right. I mean, a mantra I've always had, and, you know, when I've come through really, really hard things, has been stay open.
Right.
You know, because I know if I shut down, I know my heart is one of my most valuable assets. And I know that if I shut down and get into that fear, into that anger, that I'm just, it will literally take me out. There's a woman named Alice Miller that wrote a book called The Body Never Lies. And I really, really believe that. And the more that I've done this work personally to sort of unpack what's been in me, the more effective you become, you know, in the outside world. And I've really gotten to the place where it's like everybody's talking about climate, we need to do this, we need to do that. I think climate work is an inside job. And that for any of these movements, whether it's the food movement, climate, any of these things, if people don't believe they matter themselves, they're not going to care about anything outside of themselves. And so that work of helping people remember why they're here and why they matter, and it doesn't need to be on these huge grand scales. I mean, again, that first talk, there were 6 people there, and I thought, you know, that's where I start. I mean, I never could have imagined what would unfold from that. And don't be afraid to start small, you know? Yeah. But I think like that is to give yourself permission to participate. That's what I would love to see is 100% participation. And that's going to look and feel different for all of us. You know, it's like somebody's got little kids, they can participate in one way. I mean, I coach women all the time. It's like your life's going to unfold in chapters, you know, and right now you've got a really intense chapter with little kids at home. So you're going to be free in 10 years' time in a way that you can't imagine, and just trust that unfolding. But yeah, I mean, I really do think that for people to remember that they really matter, and it gets back to that voice in your head. You know, if you've been living most of your life with a really critical voice, you may have forgotten that.
Yeah, and sit with that, and let that be your first kind of exercise in swamp sitting, right? Yeah. And just go, whose is that? Where did it come from?
Yep. Does it serve me?
Yeah.
Who is it serving?
Right.
Like, what is it actually serving?
Right. I have an interesting that popped in my head, and I'd love to get your take on it. Because it's speaking of like so much of what you're talking about and writing about, and that's around activism. So there's an edge to it that can slip over into the other side of major judgment, right? You can name climate change. You can call plant-based vegan. You can, whatever it is. Hell, even the carnivore, like whatever, it doesn't matter. And to your point, without doing the work, there sometimes can be a righteousness and venom and anger for even though their cause could be better, it could be right, quote unquote. But the way people are going about it, it's not an invitation for change.
Right.
It's actually vitriol, and people know judgment, and they've already lost because their energy, even before their mouth opens, they've already lost the audience.
Well, I think it gets to shame, which I talk about in Seeding Innovation too. And I think shame is one of the hardest emotions as a human being to process. And I really, there's the story of like how we each have two wolves, one on each shoulder, and they're talking at you. I think we each have two compasses, and the two compasses, one is love and one is fear. And I really, at this point, truly believe that the role that fear serves is really to only help you navigate your ego and your shame. That fear just is trying to protect your ego and trying to protect anyone from knowing about your shame. And when I do some of these exercises with people, it's like if we were to all actually name our shame and take it out of us and put it, the ball that it is, take it out and put it on the table, everybody together, there'd be so many that were the same. Right. We would have so many that are the same. And yet we hold these internally as if we're the only one, that are hiding these things. And I really do believe that like shame cannot exist in love. I just think if you can help someone bring whatever it is they think they're ashamed of to light, it cannot exist in love. And when I listen to the activism and I know that I've been the recipient of that kind of anger. I've had people tell me I need to advocate for things that I'm not qualified to advocate for, and there's so much anger and vitriol. I understand that. What I have learned is that anger is a mask for sadness. Right. And so if you can see that anger as a mask for a sadness of a given situation for that person, you can come at them with a compassion that you maybe can't always find, when there's anger. But yeah, anger is sort of a mask, I think, for other things that are going on underneath.
Yeah, because that's the surface, and it's easy for all of us to
anger is
push
easier
back.
than sadness.
Yeah.
Anger is easier than sadness.
Yeah.
If we actually feel sad, that energy is tough. And then, I do think shame is probably the hardest. And so when we're talking about all of these changes and all of this transformation, there is a component of shame because in some capacity we've played a role in this, whether we meant to or not. That sort of a awakening that happens. I think about it, in what I've learned through the food system on race and how land was taken from Black farmers and the discriminatory lending practices. And I'm like, I went to some of the best schools in the country and had absolutely no idea. Right. And the grief and the shame around that ignorance and my role in that ignorance, I really had to sit with it, and try to figure out how can I actually participate in, a better understanding here. And I do think shame, I think shame, I think is probably one of the things that's the most shackling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's tricky, and you slip into it. Next thing you know.
And I think too, like for men, there's so many men that I've worked with where I can feel that shame is really the thing. And so how do you wrap them in the right supportive scaffolding? How do you help them feel that sort of that love and support, that solidarity, the way you feel on a sports team, like give that kind of love and support so that the shame isn't dictating the behavior.
It just hit me. It's like, I haven't thought this through, but it's almost like I'm going to use your term, the scaffolding of men in the business world for whatever long that's been. It's built upon force. right? So you have a scary boss. They dictate all of that stuff. They imbue that forcible, almost intimidating, and that's not a natural state for men. And so, as you know, someone born in 1970, I saw again, I haven't even thought this through. It's just kind of hitting me now. My dad was this very smart academic trying to compete against his brothers who were fucking badass engineers in Boulder at the Atmospheric Center, Neil, and his other brother, who was the head engineer for the Alaskan pipeline. So my dad was already in his family just competing. I gotta be better, and so then he's pushing himself into these areas when he was actually, him and I share a lot of similar values and kind of characterizations of who we are, and he was very empathetic and he loved people, but yet watching that, and so kind of just extrapolating on what you're saying, it's like, oh, underneath all of that, my dad was so full of shame that's what led him to drink and to not be able to unpack that. And so as you're meeting CEOs, the fact that we are these men that in truth we want to, of course, guide, protect, lead in our ways. But God, we need the feminine strength and balance, and that combination.
Oh, totally.
And healthy is so powerful.
Well, and I'm so grateful. I mean, my boys are 21 and almost 23, so raising men,
Yeah.
and the responsibility I felt, of and having 2 boys and 2 girls and all of those conversations. I mean, everybody's got something to say about everything, and it's fascinating. And I agree completely. And if you really look at any species in nature, they've got this balance of masculine and feminine. It's just how nature works. It's just in perfect balance. Trees, everything. It's like it's in balance. Except for us. We're the one species that just got way out of whack on that balance. And I really do believe that balance in governance, corporate governance, leadership, is the ultimate sustainability play.
Totally.
Because I've only moved through the world as a woman. You've only moved through the world as a man, and it's like that experience that we bring is so much more collective when it's put together. For me to try to assume,
Right.
I would fail, and for you to assume, you would fail. So to have those shared experiences in a boardroom around the table in governance, to me is really the solution. If you really look at nature, like, we're the only species that isn't doing that, and we're trashing the planet as a result.
There you go.
So, and it's not, I mean, again, with my sons, it's like, this is not, because they'll get prickly and be like, the male bashing and all this stuff. And it's like, it's not that at all. It's there's an equilibrium that has been missing that needs to be restored.
It's a male balancing, and that's all it is. It's, and this misguided kind of instruction manual, right, that we have been given.
When you're operating from that place, I don't want to assume, but it seems that you're not allowed to operate at your full scope, that it's sort of this very narrow, and I think there's incredible opportunity to bring that collaboration forward. I know the best work I have ever done has been with a really strong male partner that, there's just trust in that relationship, and then just incredible things will flow out of that.
Yeah.
But, it does get back to trust. It does get back to safety, and that's not a given either. So.
No, that is definitely, that is an earned thing, and that's time, right?
So much time.
And then as those partners get their own curveballs,
yep.
How are they responding?
Right.
Right?
Right.
When pressure gets applied, pressure's applied, money's applied, you're going to see colors. You're going to see the truth. And if there's one lesson I've learned, I put my dream on top of what I want to see on top of people, and I lose focus of not focus. I lose the ability to receive the information that they're giving, and then I put myself in bad situations. Like I invest into something, or I think they're going to do it this way, and
Yep.
it's just like, wait a minute. But we were going to convert this waste into fuel, and we were going to save the. That's not what you're doing. Like,
Right.
you know, it's you blind yourself sometimes when you also don't sit in the reception of who people are.
I think the receiving piece is interesting, and it's tough, especially if we've been raised to be sort of fiercely independent, and you know, we're taught we should figure all this stuff out, and to receive is can feel uncomfortable, I think. And it's also one of the greatest gifts that you can give a friend, because you know how you feel when you get to like love on somebody you care about and give them what they need, or they're going through something hard and it feels so good to give. That's what receiving is, just flipped, you know? And so then you're giving that same thing back to your friends. And instead of seeing it as weakness or, you know, vulnerability, it truly is a gift. And then I think too, it's that collaborative weave. We become better because we've got this collective collaborative that we're drawing from, instead of just this one solo lens.
And that's a very powerful thing that I know I can easily do. I can easily I gotta do all this, and I put false and real pressure on myself when I don't have to.
Yeah. And probably has something to do with that voice in your head.
Probably. So I got my own swamp. I got another swamp to sit in.
Yeah.
But Robyn, you're doing so many things, and I'm so just, you could do so much, and you could get involved in so much. I guess, where's your focus now? What are you most excited about? Where do you see the best use of your time and energy right now?
I think it has a lot to do with this female leadership and the soft and incredibly strong power of women. Every single person is on the planet because a woman was strong enough to deliver them. And
True.
somehow we've forgotten that that's just this incredible magic and this power that we hold.
Yeah.
There is something called the Great Wealth Transfer that's about to happen, and $30 trillion is about to land into the hands of women for the first time as they inherit from either a spouse or a parent. And it's as recently as 1988 that the Women's Business Ownership Act was passed. And I was a junior in high school, you know, and it was an act that was passed that let women start a business by herself without a spouse or a dad. And that was 1988. I mean, that is just not that long ago.
Oh my God.
And so when you look at sort of the collective of all of these things and the opportunity that's there, and that 60% of college grads now are women, you know, there really is an incredible opportunity to really usher in this next generation of female leadership. And I do really, really believe that if it's coming from this very centered, very grounded, very heart-centered place, it will be the most effective. And I know that I can speak to that because I am, you know, at a point where to speak to it with such authenticity and candor and such honor and honesty so that other people feel that they can participate too. It's in that authenticity that people feel that they belong. So it's a lot of work with different corporates. The World Bank really does see the opportunity in women's leadership. You know, is the finance world, which is so due for disruption. I mean, I love disruption. That's the part of me that I just love. I get so excited about opportunities, and it's 98% white male. You know, it was structured that way, and that's huge opportunity. And so, you know, just the way we had the, like, Whole Foods came into the grocery industry, and that felt really radical 30 years ago. You know, those companies are emerging now in the finance space. And the opportunity that's there to really think about how we're stewarding our capital and our investments, the way we shop for groceries, the way we shop for financial products, there's huge opportunity there. So I would probably say those two spaces.
Oh, man. Yeah, please keep going. Because I don't even know the right word to say it, but it gives me hope because of these are generalized statements that it just doesn't seem like if you let men continue to not be balanced, they just don't have the same sensibility and the width that women bring. It's like saying the ball is going to bounce if it's just half a ball.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's like that.
It makes no sense.
It makes no sense. And it's like, again, let's be realist. Look around. What's the result? Like we have to make some changes.
Well, I mean, like
here.
the word regeneration right now is just everywhere.
Right,
You know,
right.
the food industry and soil and farming and regeneration. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, I literally am a regeneration machine. I have produced 4 people, you know, like regenerating by its definition is a mother, you know? And so I think there's something that is intuitively wired in us. And I've had the ability to give voice to that. And I do think, to me, it's such a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful thing. And, you know, it was really learning how to alchemize the anger and the sadness and the grief, because those are only effective in the short term. They are effective, you know, but it's so hard to stay in that energy. That energy is just such a downward spiral. And so, you know, to learn to alchemize that, so that we can really drive these solutions in an effective way. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that collaborative, the masculine and the feminine imbalance is, I mean, it's what works in nature. Nature has taught us over and over and over and over again. That's what works.
God forbid we follow nature.
Yep.
Thank you for all that you've gone through, all that you're doing, and truly seeding innovation. And I really love that. Thank you for writing the book. And yeah, I think you're just beginning.
It feels like that. I mean, I think the other title of the book could have been Atomic Courage.
Right.
I love courage. I mean, courage. Right. I just love courage.
Yeah.
You know, that my friends are all really courageous, brave souls. And it does feel like it's just beginning. I feel like the last 15 years have been the warm-up lap, which is kind of crazy.
Right.
But it does feel that way.
Right. I feel the same way. Like whatever. The past is whatever. We got stuff to do. So I'm grateful for you. I love and adore you. And I'm so stoked for all of the continued blessings that you're going to give people and women and innovations in this world, because it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it is fun now. I mean, I think there's so much joy in it now, and that was something I had to learn to do, which was hit pause. And when I could feel the joy, which, you know, when you're racing and working and pushing as hard as you and I have done, to really give yourself permission to pause, to catch your breath, to know that's part of the job. But I can remember when, I think it was last year, where I just felt like this little, like, bubbles, like carbonation, like I joke, it's like a Topo Chico bottle, you know, where it just felt like there was something bubbling up, and it was that joy, and the joy in sharing the work, the joy in sharing these solutions, the joy in sharing the STOP protocol, these ways that we can actually really begin to participate in the change and harness these imposters in our heads, and to be able to give that to other people. I've always felt so lucky that that's my work, because the knowledge is such a gift, and giving it feels like how you feel when you give a gift.
Right. Well, it's so authentic because you've cultivated these skills and now can articulate them because you've gone through it. And there's no better voice from the truest sense of it that someone has gone through it. And hopefully that can stave off some of the people's kind of unnecessary pain and suffering, even though pain will come in certain forms. But again, the curveballs will come. It's what you do with those.
Totally.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you.